So if you don't know me, I am Crystal. I created the product analytics course on Reforge that is live today. So if what we are talking about today interests you, you want to know more, you want to know the tips and tricks, you want the templates, this is the course for you. Today we only have 45 minutes. My course program is 4 days of live sessions and lots of async content with a bunch of Google Sheet templates, SQL query templates. So if you want the actual meaty stuff, there's only so much we can cover in 45 minutes. So course is where it's at afterwards. This course is built up off of my experience working with startups, both small and large. When I first joined Gojek, a multi-platform ride-hailing, payments, food delivery, logistics service in Indonesia, it was about 30 people. When I left 5 years later, we were about 10,000 people doing millions of orders per day. So I have seen us scale and helped support that scale over those years with a lot of the analytics frameworks that I wish I had foundationalized and kind of frameworked in my time there to cut through all of the mistakes that we made along the way. So all of my product analytics frameworks includes activation funnels, which we'll deep dive into today, but also cohort analytics, aha moment analysis, uh, interesting insights for segmentation and differentiation across your product suite. So all of these insights are ways of fine-tuning your product and figuring out what is the most important thing to work on for you. First, let's start out with some quick polls. We talked about some SQL analysis. We also talked about activation funnels. So quick Q&A is going to pop up on your screen. Go ahead and pick an option so that you can give me some guidance on how deep do I gotta go here on the SQL stuff and how much information do we need to go through on the basic versus the ideal funnel. Traditional funnel, everyone looks like mostly knows what this is. A lot of people know SQL. SQL takes, in my mind, a day to learn, but a lifetime to master. So if you have gone through some online course to write SQL, you probably know it, but have you mastered it? All right, so we're about half-half on the funnel stuff and about half-half on the SQL stuff. All right, this gives me a better idea of how deep we're gonna go. Now, I'm not gonna teach SQL or be able to share the code on this, but I'll see what I can do to add to today's session. All right, so for those of you who don't understand the traditional funnel analysis, let's keep it really simple. When you're doing a funnel analysis, we want to identify problem areas. Where does largest drop off occur? And at what stage in the user journey do we need improvement? And why do we need to know these problem areas? Because we're trying to optimize the user experience. So knowing all of these different drop-off points step by step helps us tailor that user experience so that users are able to progress in our funnel and reach their final aha moment, the core value proposition that we give to a user in our product. So the first step in creating this traditional funnel analysis is you define some key steps. And so that means identifying the significant interaction, the significant decisions that users make while engaging in your product, and they should reflect that critical interaction point that could influence the user's decision to continue using the product or ultimately churn and drop off. So typically, you might want to start with some basic steps. You sign up. In an e-commerce platform, you might view a product page, view an SKU, and then finally your conversion event. You place an order. These are some key steps that you would delineate and help tracks your progress linearly so that you know where the drop-off is occurring. So you're looking at here, step 1, number of users who completed that sign-up process. Step 2, how many people looked at a product page. Step 3, how many ultimately completed an order. The second part of conducting this analysis is taking each of those defined steps and calculating a drop-off rate. And that means quantifying how many users disengaged at each stage. This is the key metric for defining progress through the funnel. And I think it's important here to realize that some funnels will reflect drop-off rates based on the first step, number 1, or based on the step before it. For today, we'll go through these step before it, and you'll know when your funnel illustrates the step before it if the percentages are bigger on the right side than they are on the left, because you cannot have 70% of people doing an order confirmed out of the 100%. Most likely, this is 70% of the step before it, the payment info saved. Think of these conversion rates as the inverse of your churn. Retention is the inverse of churn. And so hold on to this concept, because we will talk about this a little bit later when we think about the trade-offs in deciding which of these steps would you optimize and how do you decide the value of each step. So here we have a drop-off rate of 100% of users who made it to home, 45% made it to viewing an SKU, which means 55% of the users in home dropped off. So that's the key definition of these traditional funnels and traditionally how we view an analysis. This is great, but I would say it's necessary but insufficient. The funnel tells you the drop-off rate in between steps, but it doesn't actually tell you the long-term retention rate of your users. Just because someone completed an order doesn't mean they continue to do so again. The metric is essential, drop-off rates, but it's not sufficient on its own for this comprehensive analysis. Why do we stop here? The analysis here would essentially drops the ball in measuring retention, and we end up throwing that as an activation team. We say, hey, this is the engagement team's problem, it's the product marketing team's problem. And that's kind of my issue with funnels as they traditionally are measured. They have this narrow scope that doesn't tell you exactly what the health of the product is, just what the onboarding experience is. Products with good funnel conversion rates can actually hide bad retention in a product because it fails to really indicate whether or not the feature is creating or the product is creating sustained value for users over time. The second problem with this traditional funnel analysis is that you don't actually get to see the changes in user behavior and engagement trends over time. So that snapshot funnel, is this good or is this bad? Over what time period is this funnel conversion rate happening? Are users who signed up last week seeing the exact same conversion rates versus the users who signed up last month? And so you lack an understanding of whether or not our product changes are actually driving impact on our product conversion rates. Third problem with the traditional funnel analysis is, great, I know quantifiably how many users are dropping off, but I'm not getting any leading indicators as to why that is or who is doing it or what segments are performing better than others. So traditional funnel analysis, it has its role, it has a place. It's giving me a high-level summary of user onboarding, it's pinpointing where that largest drop-off is. I get to know this absolute value and percentage relative value, but ultimately, it's not showing me what specific user segments are deriving significant value from my product. I don't know who might be using the product in unique or unintended ways, which would provide me some valuable insights. I don't know what the trends over time are because this is a static view that just shows me the current snapshot in time. And finally, it's not handing over my understanding of activation into a direct cohort analysis. So a lot of cohort analyses will blur together the first time I've completed a transaction and whether or not I continue to do so. But in cohorts, just because you've done your first transaction doesn't mean that you're going to necessarily do your second transaction. There is generally a certain point at which retention rates stabilize, and we'll see how we can use that information and that knowledge from cohort analysis to building the ideal funnel analysis instead. So traditional funnels, great, provide some useful metrics, but they need to be complemented with some more nuanced measures of user engagement and value over time so that we get a more complete picture of the product's health and some potential growth areas. So what does that look like? Here's a quick preview of what I always create for every company that I work with. There are two types of charts here. One is essentially a table, and then you have some visuals that build off of that. And this shows you both absolute values, relative values, but also cohort trends over time in two ways. So how do you solve for those limitations? Three key strategies that I want to go through, and we'll touch upon some illustrations and examples of this. But one, we have to close the retention loop gap. The analysis handover from conversion funnels to cohort analysis is broken for a lot of companies. They look at these two things in isolation when we can be closing the gap and synchronizing them much more closely by changing which steps we use in our funnel analysis. The second thing is I will never look at a funnel conversion as a single row of data. It's useless because everything in our product world is based on relative benchmarks. Industry benchmarks, great to know, but the best benchmark you can ever have is based on your own user base. So the benchmark of last week's cohort versus this week's cohort, that's the best benchmark you can use to measure relative performance and whether or not you are getting better over time. Third thing is these funnels need to be compared with one another, and steps in the funnel, their conversion rates from one to the next need to be compared with different user segments beyond just cohorts, but on other types of segmentation that we'll get through here. So let's get to number one. How do you pick the right step in your funnel, and how do you choose a representative data point that correlates with stabilized long-term retention? We know that cohorts tell you how many users continued to transact over time. The mistake most people make with the traditional funnel is they stop with the first transaction. And that first transaction is here in column 0. 100% of the users who completed a transaction are here. But how many people made it to the second transaction? That drop-off rate is astounding. And we're isolating these two analyses when we don't include the second transaction in our conversion funnel analysis. Being able to connect the point at which retention has stabilized, which here I would actually say is column 2, which is essentially at month 3, that should be your last step in the conversion funnel. Instead of ending the funnel at the first transaction, end the funnel at the point of stabilized retention. And for every company, this is going to be different. For some people, it's going to be the second transaction or a certain other type of engagement, like number of followers or number of friends. But the ideal activation funnel will have at least 4 key steps. Most companies will end conversion Step 3, but expand your funnel as much as you need. How many transactions are needed for stable retention to emerge? Doing so this ideal funnel extends beyond that first conversion, and let's say at a minimum includes the second transaction. And that's critical because now you understand not just the initial conversion, but repeat usage. And that's a stronger indicator of the product's value. It's a stronger way of handing off your activation analysis to your cohort analysis and deepening engagement and retention. And so I look at the funnel as incomplete without this final step. Cohort analysis is much better for understanding the depth of engagement. Activation funnels should be extended beyond just, did I onboard, to, am I retained? So some key steps here are pretty obvious. I usually use first seen as my first step in the funnel. Many companies, because they might be limited by data collection or access to tracking, will use sign-up events. But if you have a visitor ID, use first seen. Setup moment, that could be your sign-up event, whether or not users signed up, whether or not they took some first action, but something to set them up for the aha moment. The aha moment will be the moment where you deliver your core value proposition, when the user experiences the value, and then the fourth and onwards, if necessary, should be that point of retention, of doing that aha moment over again. So let's go through an example. Here, I'm using just the static one-shot view just to illustrate the steps. But in this type of product, I'm going to start doing order confirmed. I'm going to look at the activation funnel. I'll add my steps, and I'm going to expand my conversion rates beyond just the 4 steps. I'm going to have order confirmed again as my repeat purchase. And this gives me enough touch points if in this product, the second transaction is 90% guaranteed for the user to retain in the next month. So there is work involved to figure out what is the last step. You have to run some survival analysis. You have to run a probability analysis to understand at what point of conversion can I let users go, and I'm then just working on deepening engagement on my cohort analysis. But the activation funnel should be the point of stickiness. The second strategy here is to visualize these trends by cohort. So in that first case, we looked at one row of data. That's just a snapshot in time. Usually it's telling you last month's conversion rates over a 28-day window. What I like to do is break users into cohorts. And so I'll look at users from August, give them 30 days to convert. Then I'll look at users in July, give them 30 days to convert. And here everyone has a relative basis. Relative to each cohort's timeline, I now have this more dynamic view of user behavior. This perspective helps me track the changes in engagement and conversion rates over time. And now I'll have a more nuanced view of the trends and shifts in user behavior, either due to increased acquisition or changes in the product experience. So every cohort will get its own funnel analysis row, and I can compare the different patterns across different sign-up dates. And this should tell me how various segments are interacting with the product over time. Now let's expand that out. Expand that out to every single cohort. And now you have 2 types of tables that you can generate. The first is how many users triggered each step. That's the cohort table on the left. Pure number. You have 126 users who visited the homepage, 105 users who viewed an SKU, 100 users who added to cart, and so on. Now, the interesting new way to look at activation analysis is to actually think of your users in discrete buckets. If you were to place every step on a spectrum and you had to place every user in the bucket step that they last triggered, where do they stop? This is actually what you get, this chart on the right. So 21 users stopped at home. 5 users, their last activity was viewing an SKU. 62 users, their last behavior was adding to cart. They never made it past add to cart. And so this is actually the 100% of the 126. This is a simple math. It's not super complicated. There is a Google Sheet template that I have built for this in the program, but you're essentially taking all 126 people, and instead of putting them into a conversion funnel, you're putting them into these discrete buckets as an absolute number of users. Remember, we went through this in the beginning of our talk. The inverse of conversion rate is churn. And so what you're seeing here is the inverse. This is how many users churned at each step. So being more specific, you had 38 people in order confirmed. So if you want to build this on your own in Google Sheets, lay out your easy part of the table on the left. Everyone has this, everyone can count in SQL how many users, unique users triggered every event. If you're running something like segment, you can select count distinct user ID, that triggered event name equals order confirmed. And likely you will get something like 38. Then you'll do a second query. Count distinct, how many users did order confirmed, but they have 2 rows of data, and that would be 13. And so the delta between that, because this is a linear funnel, you can't do one step and you can't progress to step 2 without doing step 1. The difference here, that delta of 38 versus 13 people, is 25. So while 38 users did an order confirmed, only 13 did that second order, which means 25 people dropped off at order confirmed, number 1. So this is how you calculate the diff layer activation funnel. Let me answer a few questions before we move on, because this is kind of a mind shift for a lot of people. This isn't how you see most traditional activation funnels. So is there, let's see, repeated aha moment, is this the same as the habit moment? Yes. If you're part of the Reforge curriculum and you understand how things work, yes, if your habit moment is defined as the point at which retention is stable. Second question, for the number of people that come to the homepage, is there a deduping or some type of filter that should be added here? Yes. Every user is uniquely placed in each of these cohort rows. So if I'm a user in the July 30th cohort, I should not appear in any other row in this table. Now, specifically in operationalizing this, you will have to create windows of time. So only give users 3 months to convert. Does that mean that your later cohorts, your more recent cohorts, you won't be able to do that analysis because they haven't had 30 days to live in your platform? Yes, but you can keep doing this on a rolling basis. And then last question here. Is second order confirmed, repeat order, or a second confirmation page of an order? This should be the repeat order. This is not about viewing a certain page. This is about, I did some aha moment enough times that I'm sticky on the product. All right. So this chart here on the left, this is exactly the chart that we saw on the right last time. So for those of you who are, this is, I know, a mind shift. So I'm going to go back real quick. Chart on the left, number of users who triggered every step. So I am duplicated in each column, but I am not duplicated across rows. Does that make sense? It means if I did a second order confirm, I'm part of the 13 people who did this activity. I obviously also confirmed a first order, so I'm also part of the 38. I'm also part of the users that added to cart. I'm part of this 100. I'm also someone who viewed an SKU, part of the 105. So as a single user who signed up in June 18, I am, and I did second order confirmed, I show up in every single cell on this row. However, because I did second order confirmed, for the table on the right, the only place that I show up is in the cell 13 on the far right cell. Sorry, I don't know if people can see my mouse pointer. If I only show up in one place in this chart on the right. I know, this is a really different way of looking at activation funnels. But why do we do this? Because what I care about is zooming in to this last step triggered analysis. So let's pause here. We're zooming in to this table that outlines where every user dropped off, unique drop-off points. Color here is the distance in the funnel that a user progressed to. Orange is the most valuable user type. I want everyone to end up in orange. I want that orange bar to be as large as possible because I don't want people to get stuck at home. If I'm a user who went to home, viewed SKU, I'm part of this 5 in the June 18 cohort, I never made it to add to cart, I'm stuck in this view SKU, part of these 4 other people as a total of 5. I will show up on this first chart on the right under view SKU in this red bucket, part of that tiny red bucket in the first column. Because I got stuck here, that's the proportion of users who are remaining. The users who made it to add to cart, they're in the yellow bar. Users who made it to order confirmed, they're in the green bar. Users who made it to second order confirmed, our most valuable cohort step, they made it to the orange bar. This is the relative proportional version. This adds up to 100%, the stacked bar chart that tells you over time how your product is doing. And you can see here, what trend do we see? We see that the orange bar over time, June to December, it's actually getting better. The orange bar is starting to be a bigger proportion of the users in our overall cohort. So less people are getting stuck at the add to cart, less people are getting stuck at viewing an SKU, more people are converting as a percentage of people in the cohort. That's a good sign. Maybe there were product changes that helped increase that conversion rate and change that proportionality. If you're in Southeast Asia, yes, also seasonality, 12/12, great holiday for e-commerce. And so this will help you illustrate how good am I doing? How much progress are users experiencing? What stage are they ending at? Now, the bottom chart is an absolute number basis. This can be a little bit misleading. You can see here that there are some spikes in acquisition on an absolute basis in October. See a huge spike in users that we acquired, but a bunch of them just got stuck in step 1. They only viewed home and then they dropped off. What we really care about is on an absolute basis, am I getting people in the order confirmed and second order confirmed? Because that's the moneymaker. So you'll definitely want to extrapolate these. So this is that same chart. So if you actually want to see, am I getting more transactions? Remove the steps in the activation funnel that aren't just transactions. You can start to see if on a conversion rate basis whether or not the absolute number of value creating transactions, whether or not there are more users doing it or not. So these two orange and green bars, which signify money being generated, revenue being generated, which I know a lot of startups are starting to care about now. Pull those out and just show that absolute number of users. Because remember, these are distinct. These are additive users. Users who are in the second order confirmed do not exist in the order confirmed because we put them in distinct buckets. So this analysis format of creating the last step triggered diff analysis as a funnel analysis, it's giving. It's the analysis that gives you multiple types of charts, multiple types of analyses, lots of insights. Conceptually hard to do, but very clear. Got this distance in the funnel. You start to see peaks caused by PR. You can see whether or not that PR translated to more net orders. It's an apples to apples comparison of your user's experience. All right, so that was a big concept. We're gonna keep going. 3, we're gonna start understanding different user behaviors and needs so that we can inform some strategies of repositioning or remarketing our product to align more closely with segments that are performing better. So the best part of activation funnel analysis is that you get this apples to apples comparison of how users perform in your funnel. This is a different example. So I took some organic users and paid sales assisted users. What is their conversion rate over time? Same sign up weeks, but different segment of users. And I'm comparing them next to each other. You'll see that some users, sorry, that 111% is definitely a typo. But your organic funnel versus your non-organic funnel, to me, looks like the non-organic funnel is doing a little bit better in converting than the organic funnel. And this is because non-organic in this product example is a sales assisted model. And you can see in what step is sales really driving the most value. It looks like the setup moment. So there's something wrong in our product's setup moment experience that sales is compensating for. But you can do this segmentation with any logical framework that you have. Let's go to a second example. Let's go to our e-commerce example here. Roy asked a good question in chat that's really quick. Why weekly versus monthly? Again, it's up to you. What is your natural frequency of usage? At what point in time do you expect users to convert? You can do, I prefer weekly because yes, as Chirag said, you react faster to changes, you close your funnel quickly. But if you know that users don't complete their transactions within 1 week or they don't reach the aha moment in a week, then yes, use the monthly. Everything here is, templated guidelines and frameworks, but adapt the product templates to your product's specific nuances. All right, we've got 10 minutes left, so we're gonna go through our quick case study, brain teaser for the morning or afternoon. Which step in this funnel would you choose to work on? You're looking at this on a relative basis. 45% of users made it to viewing an SKU from home. 28% of those users made it to add to cart. What are we going to work on here? You're the product manager faced with this information. The data analyst unfortunately didn't know about the new ideal activation funnel framework. They've given you a single snapshot in time. At least they're telling you, hey, this is first time sessions in August 2021, got a snapshot. But with the little that you have here, how would you know what to work on? There's a very clear divide here, and I don't know which one's going to win out. Seeing half on view SKU to add to cart, and then another half at order confirmed to second order confirmed. And I think the step that you pick reveals a lot about the type of person you are. Do you want to work on the big nebulous problem, or do you want to work on I need to see that revenue and I need that impact today? All right. So it depends. We don't have enough information here. Sorry, this is a bit of a trick question. Here's the spectrum of opportunity that I would consider. Let's say that you do your whole trend analysis, you're doing this by cohort, you're looking at it within the buckets of time that you have. I'm not going to show you the entire ideal funnel here because it's going to take up too much space. But let's say you're doing the best practice. You're looking at the cohorts over time, you have a sense of the general trends. How do you think of this spectrum of opportunity now? At the top of the funnel there and the bottom of the funnel, I like to think about this in 4 elements: audience size, complexity size, value proximity, specificity. So at the top of the funnel, there's some pros and cons when you choose to work on the funnel. You have a large audience size, right? The absolute number of people at the top of the funnel is always higher than at the bottom of the funnel. And these users, pretty clear what you need to do. To get them to view a SKU, they need to look at our product, right? These steps are fairly easy and it's limited as to what they've been exposed to. The amount of education and the clarity of education about your value proposition is very clear. There's very low complexity. Now, the cons of working at the top of the funnel are 2. Value proximity. And this is why I always see people benchmarking at the top and the bottom of these funnels. Path to conversion is longer, and that is the counterweight to the audience size. Yes, you have a big audience size, but the path to getting them to monetize is fairly longer. The last trade-off here is the specificity. For the users who viewed an SKU and dropped off, I'm not sure I know why they dropped off. Have they seen the price? Do we not ship to their area? Did they find another product that was better on a different website? I don't have a lot of data to nuance and understand these users and segment them by their needs or use cases more aggressively because they're at the top of the funnel. Less data at the top of the funnel than you do at the end of the funnel. That's a fact. You're collecting less data for those who dropped off early. At the bottom of the funnel, you have the exact opposite trade-offs here. Low audience size. You're running an experiment and you're spending engineering resources on much less people. Generally, a fraction of the people are going to experience any engineering work that you do at the bottom of the funnel than you would at the top of the funnel. That is a trade-off. And engineers may not like that as much, right? Because we're doing code and product and tech to scale. So the fact that you are targeting and providing value to less users, it's a trade-off. The second trade-off here is high complexity. Now, you actually have lots of reasons that someone could have dropped off. They have lots of information and understandings about your product amalgamated over all of these different steps of the product that they have experienced. And now it's unclear which one of these, what combination of these experiences led them to ultimately dropping off. That might make the analysis more complex. There's a lot more data to process, a lot more hypotheses to test and disprove. So that is a trade-off in working at the bottom of the funnel, or working on a step at the bottom of the funnel. Pros though, if you fix order confirmed and you get to order confirmed again, this one is misleading. So everyone who selected that, I believe you were tricked because you didn't realize that steps home to payment info saved are actually in between order confirmed and order confirmed again. You have to somehow fix all of the steps in between a repeat transaction. So that's actually a lot of complexity um, to work on. But if you're working on payment info saved to order confirmed, if you fix that one step, hey, you've monetized directly in the next user journey. So your value proximity closer to the point of transaction, closer to the point of direct monetization, the ROI is very clear, easy to measure, easy to tell engineering that your change in the product led to this much dollar value. And here, again, high specificity. If you can see exactly what led to a drop-off because you have a lot more signals and a lot more data collected, you may have an easier time pinpointing specific bugs or triaging specific segments of users who have the largest problem and are contributing the most to this drop-off. Let's look at an example. So this is an example of our last trade-off, the specificity. So in this third strategy of comparing segments, we're picking a step. And for me, I would pick a step that's closer to the end of the funnel because this is monetization era. People want to cut costs, people want to increase revenue. So let's say I've picked address info saved to payment info saved. Now, over the course of my user journey experience, I was able to collect some data. And what I did here was I've segmented out not the users who dropped off, but the users that converted. So I'm taking my best user segment and my worst user segment. My best user segment made it to payment info saved, and I'm now splitting out that one step, the step of payment info saved, and I've split it into different segments of users. So I'm looking at users who selected PayPal, and because they were going through the previous steps in my user journey, I've also collected what platform they're using, and I've cross-segmented users on mobile who selected PayPal, users on desktop who had selected PayPal, users on mobile who selected credit card payment, and so on. And so after building this segmentation, I'll see here, desktop seems to have a much higher conversion, a much longer time to convert. And mobile is my biggest segment. The percent of users using mobile versus desktop is higher. And what I'm looking at here is not the conversion rate, but the time that it took to move between these two steps. So I'm seeing here that the median time it took for a mobile user on credit card took 134 seconds to get from from address info saved to payment info saved, to completing the payment info saved step. And so someone who selected credit card took 134 seconds, either 134 seconds or less, 50% of that population. But on average, it took 258 seconds. And so this tells me that credit card experiences are a pretty long-winded process. Some people are managing to make it through because they need the product or they have higher intent, but this looks problematic. These numbers are much higher for credit card than they are for PayPal, and it's a problem for both mobile and desktop users. And here we ended up finding out that the UI on the page was actually really finicky for the credit card users. There was no use your camera to take a photo, to insert your credit card options, but seeing this, the vast difference between PayPal and credit card usage and the conversion rates of these two segments, we ended up prioritizing this and fixing this problem. That was a lot. there's only so much we can get to in 45 minutes, but we're at time. But if you take away anything from these three key strategies, it's figure out the right step in your funnel to use as the conclusion, expand your activation analysis to a trend by cohort. 3, generate your diffs and segment them out to compare what that activation funnel looks like across different types of not just user segments, but demographics. I have a few minutes for Q&A. If people want to stick around and ask questions, you can drop them to the Q&A chat. But this is a lot. This is actually a summary of just one module in my program on Reforge. Signups are closing, I believe, in 3 weeks. So you don't have a lot of time, and it will fill up. There are limited slots, and we're getting closer to full. So sign up if you want to go deeper into the concepts here. On the website, there are times posted for PST, but I am also considering adding CET times or times that will be better for London and Asia and India as well. So there will be a second time zone slot that I'll post about on my LinkedIn. All right, let's look at some Q&A here. So Simon, do you want to go ahead and unmute? Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
Just a quick question from the chat about the course. Peter asks if the course is focused at all on B2B or B2C.
I believe that program outline says this is definitely going to be focused on more B2C. Yeah, because B2B, super tough, super fragmented. You would see that cohorted trend activation analysis for teams and organizations versus individuals. Like you'd have to duplicate the analysis. All right, Simon, if you're still around, do you want to unmute and ask your question live?
Yeah, I believe it's the one from the chat. I actually had a few. My question was, with those 4 key elements of pros and cons at each end of the funnel, would you weight one more higher than the other, or are they all equally impactful?
It's a good question. I'm thinking of trying to create kind of like a formula where you can input both the relative percentages and the absolute numbers to generate kind of a weighted score. But it's hard because only you know if something like this drop off is, hey, it's a bug, easy to fix, very easy to calculate the ROI. Or is it something more nuanced, like we need a new payment gateway operator and the sales team and partnerships team is going to have to go talk to someone. So I think audience size and value proximity might be something that can be objectively weighted, but the low and high complexity and the specificity, that's actually going to depend on the nuance of your product and how much data you have to collect and how clear the problems are.
Yeah, I think that's
Good
correct. That's
question.
what I thought. And the reason I asked that question is because when we went through the growth series, they talked generally to, with everything else being equal, move to the left, because you're going to get anything you fix at the top of the funnel is going to flow through to the back of the funnel. So
yes, I agree with that when it comes to fixing activation, but if your users aren't retaining, that's the bigger problem, right? Retention is always the biggest thing. And anything that fixes value capture in today's growth market or lack thereof might be the smarter bet these days.
Yeah, it's the leaky bucket thing. Yeah, you need to be
exactly
smarter with your money. So yeah, got it.
Exactly. Cool. Great question. Anya, if you're still around, do you want to unmute and ask your question live?
Yeah, thank you for the session. So my question was about calculation of users support. Yeah, I'm just wondering, okay, let's say I assume that my aha moment, the first time purchase, gonna happen like within the first week. And the next purchase is gonna be the second week, but let's say that some of the users they need more time to complete the second
Yep.
purchase, happens, let's say, in a month.
Yep.
In this case, should I calculate these people within the first cohort, or we're just moving them away?
Good question. So I answer this in more detail in the product course. This requires building your frequency spectrum graph of how many days or weeks does it usually take for a user to reach that second transaction. So let's say that you picked the second transaction, or let's say you picked the third transaction, because on a cohort chart, that's where retention starts to stabilize. So you picked transaction 3. Now, what you will do is create a frequency bar chart histogram. You'll take every user who has completed 3 transactions, and you will plot them on one bar each by the number of days it took or weeks it took to get to that third transaction. That might have, either you're going to have a chart like this that goes down, or you might have some spikes if you have different types of user segments who are using the product at different frequencies, but you're going to have to make a call. There's certain, basically I would pick like an 80% cutoff. When 80% of the users, at what point do they make their third transaction? Then I'm going to close the funnel at that point, because in any case, I want people to convert faster if possible, not longer. And so, yes, this will not represent the rosiest picture. It'll be the 80% correct, but that's also an incentive to get people to convert faster.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, so everyone's time window is equal. So I try not to show these rows of data if they haven't had enough time to convert, because it could be misleading. But sometimes if you're in a more sophisticated, mature kind of growth team who wants to be able to triage very quickly, I had my team do a projected version. So every day this would update and it would project out based on last week how many users should have converted by today. And if we were below that, something's wrong. And if we're above that, we're doing great. So you can start developing some more sophistication here, dependent on the maturity of the team.
Makes sense. Thank you so much.
Very cool. All right, Roy, if you're around, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. Let me just have a quick look. Yeah, towards the end, you mentioned that you end up fixing the time to pay with credit. I was just wondering, like, is there an effective way
Yes.
to look at the data and kind of like understand what needs fixing?
Yes.
I was just wondering how you got into that. Suddenly you change, okay, I look at average time spent. And I was wondering.
Let's see. I have this somewhere here. There we go. So we did something like this, where we looked at the average seconds between steps, but we did it for the steps in the funnel that I mentioned. So here we did, for each of these steps, what's the average and median time spent between steps? And we saw in the payment info saved that it was relatively high compared to benchmarks. Now, this is one place where industry benchmarks are all the same in e-commerce. No one enters their payment info differently, and Shopify Pay has probably the best conversion rates and data around how long that should take. And we were taking far longer, and that's why I zoomed into this step. So yes, there are certainly a lot of rabbit holes to go to, but there are ways to kind of start highlighting what I would call the bugs and obvious issues using average versus median values. So I always use these two metrics in tandem. I never use an average alone. I never use a median alone, because using both metrics tells you something very specific. It means that there is a poor experience for all device types. If the average is really high, but the median is very low, like you see in the PayPal desktop, that actually means that there are a few user segments. There's one user segment that is experiencing a wildly different experience. So when your median is low, but your average is high, some user segment is bringing that average up something is wrong there. That usually requires a deeper dive. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Perfect. Thanks.
Yep. All right. We have time for one last question. I'm gonna look for a question here on, all right, defining the aha moment. Defining the aha moment, I think I mentioned this before, but you're gonna have to look at your cohort analysis to do this. So in your cohort analysis, you'll be able to see at what point do retention rates stabilize. That's generally the last step in your activation funnel. In terms of the aha moment itself, what is my core value prop? If you don't know this answer, I cannot answer it for you. If you don't know when the user experiences your core value of your product, you may not have product market fit. So the aha moment, I think, should be clear. It should be, when do you deliver your primary value proposition? Your fourth step, though, should be the point of stabilized retention. At what point can you say that, hey, it's likely that this person is going to continue retaining, and I'll do deepening of engagement through cohort analysis instead, right? So the goal of an ideal funnel analysis is to bridge this gap that we typically have of throwing the problem over the wall. Of, I did onboarding, great, now it's someone else's problem to think about enhancing retention and engagement from a completely different mindset. And so the change here from traditional funnels to the ideal activation funnel is to bridge that gap, to get you closer and eliminate some of the more annoying to do analysis and cohort analysis and triage better. All right, we are over time. But again, if you want to reach out and get more advice, you can find me on LinkedIn, you can find me on Twitter. Sorry, X. I will one day remember how to say that. But best place, Reforge, product analytics. I have some artifacts on Reforge that you can drop a comment on, especially around cohort analysis. So if you have further questions, drop it in the artifact. Just Google or search on Reforge artifacts for my cohort analysis and drop your questions there as comments. I'll answer them in the next day. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I see some familiar faces. Oh, my goodness. Amazing. Hello, Leroy. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Take care.